I wasn't panicking after the Game 3 loss, but after the Game 4 embarrassment, oh yeah, I have my hairs absolutely on edge.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we have a lot to get through. The Jets were, once again, not particularly good in a second straight playoff game against the Blues. Another road game, another really embarrassing performance, top to bottom. There's a lot to cover here, from Winnipeg starting well but finishing awfully. You know, the presence of screens really having played a huge role in this series. And you know what? I know I took a lot of flack for calling Winnipeg's trade deadline a disaster. Guess what? It's starting to really play into this playoff run. Before we dive into all of this, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV 4K Stick. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Now, like I said, the Jets came out into this game, Game 4, needing a big response. Game 3 was humiliating. The Jets were pissed off. Arniel was pissed off. Fans were pissed off. And I remember, after that game saying, all right, let's not hyperventilate. Let's slow down. In my mind, the Jets have earned a lot more grace this year. Winnipeg, after bad losses, has usually rebounded. They've had good responses. And so I came into this game, Game 4, thinking, all right, you had a bit of a rough Game 3. It's going to happen. You were supposed to drop one of these games on the road. I did not anticipate a sweep at all. It would have been awesome if they did, but I did not guess that it was going to happen. That was really not my expectation. I did not expect Game 3 to go the way it did. I will say that. And I thought, that was going to be the worst of it. But then, tonight happened, and I asked myself if this team is starting to fall into the exact same habit that it did in previous playoff runs. And I really hope that it's not the case. I really hope that I'm overreacting, that what we're seeing here is really not the same situation. But look, I said the Jets needed to have a faster start in these road games. First one was awful. They didn't accomplish that. The second one, yes, the Jets even got early on the board. Kyle Connor finally coming through, the top line having a great shift, and Winnipeg generally owning that first period. And then, of course, at the very last second, in the last minute, St. Louis ties it. And from then on, things just went from bad to worse. I thought, all right, you maybe got a little bit of a scratch in the final minute of the first period. It's okay. Jake Neighbors getting a tip that really shouldn't have been allowed. The Schenn Fleury pairing, which actually, was a change from Arniel, again, getting victimized. Schenn not clearing the front of the goal. Fleury, I don't even know why he was up as far as he was towards the circles in the half wall. He was completely out of position. Neighbors completely wide open for the tip. And just like that, it's tied. So I thought, all right, it's okay. Let's not overreact. It's just the first period. It's tied 1-1. Going to be a hard game, right? Then the second period happened, and everything just went from bad to worst. Tyler Tucker slapped one in on a screenshot, which, again, we're going to talk specifically about the screens because that's a real big problem. But then, things went from bad to worse. Dylan Sandberg is trying to defend the net on an odd man rush of sorts from the Blues. They get a bunch of guys forward, and, Sandberg slides across. The puck sort of toddles off his stick. It's sitting right there in front of Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck doesn't quite react in time to try and cover it. I don't even know if he even saw it or knew where it was. None of the Jets skaters that were anywhere near seemed to recognize where the puck was. And guess who did? Brayden Schenn. 3-1 St. Louis. And then to make things even worse, Justin Falk slaps one in towards the end of the period off of Neil Pionk's butt cheeks. I mean, if you're going to lose, I guess you at least make it funny. And then if things couldn't possibly get worse, guess who also scores? Robert Thomas in the third period towards the start. If you were hoping for any sort of a comeback, no, that wasn't happening. This was a game where everything just seemed to snowball. And Jordan Binnington, I think he was tested on a couple of shots, but for the most part, we have had a really big absence of middle six offense. The top line has tried to hard carry. They can only do so much. And in this game, they were actually just not that great. They had a couple of decent shifts early. And then in the middle frame and final frame, they were kind of invisible. Or if they were visible, it was because they were getting burned on the back check thanks to all of these Blues chances. So, yeah. I can forgive the first, really bad loss. That's fine. Game 4, though, was a game that the Jets needed to at least look competitive. And for part of it, they did. But then for the other, like, two-thirds of it, it was embarrassing. And there's just really not other ways to sugarcoat it. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Hellebuyck has been struggling, and I think it's more by design from the Blues than just him being bad. His playoff numbers are pretty pedestrian overall. Last year, they were awful thanks to the Avs just completely eviscerating the team, and it's not like the previous playoff runs have been super successful, but I think what we're seeing here is that the Blues are just starting to outcoach the Jets. St. Louis knows what it has to do to win this series. Montgomery is a very smart, very experienced coach, and he is taking advantage of a Jets team that is not at 100% and that continues to make some lineup choices that I just don't fully understand. Barron was moved up from the fourth line, which is great, but then he was played at wing where he's just, in my mind, not as effective. If you're going to play Barron, make him your center. And then we still have Nemesnikov on the second line, despite scoring like one goal in 20 plus even 30 odd games. I don't fully understand that. I look at the third D pairing and look, Fleury and Schenn and Stanley, they all fight hard. They all work hard. You can't have two or three of them in the lineup. The Jets only have 6 defenders on this team, and you need mobility on the back end. I'm going to get more into this because I think that this is where, partly it's on the coaching staff, partly it's also on the front office for not having given them better options. But I think you look at the Schenn trade and who they brought in, right? And Schenn, look, he works pretty decently when you have a puck mover, but Winnipeg is completely size biased, and Colin Miller is somehow still sitting on your bench. Colin Miller was the best Jet skater in Game 3, and his reward was to get to the press box. What is the point? I don't understand. Someone, please explain to me why the Jets will not use Colin Miller. Is he the only thing that is going to save this team? No. But at least you have more mobility on the back end. The Blues are feasting on this Jets defense that is all out of sorts right now. Winnipeg can't cope with the pressure. And look, Miller is going to have his warts. He's going to make some of the same mistakes. But at the very least, you are going to have more zone exits and more transition game if you don't have a third pairing that you don't even trust. Look at Stanley's ice time splits. Do you really think the coaching staff actually thinks that he is capable of playing beyond 10 minutes a night? The answer is no. Schenn also really struggling in the series. He's been at times one of the worst defenders on the ice. Fleury, again, getting caught in no man's land tonight. Some of his other shifts were like whatever, but it's just the team has to not put itself in a handicap before it even gets to the puck drop. The Jets don't have the luxury of this. I don't know how much more this can be made clear when you look at this lineup, you look at the injured players, you look at how this team has played in the first couple of games and the second couple of games. You can't put yourself behind the 8 ball before you even hit the ice. And Winnipeg has done that too many times already, whether it's slow starts or a lineup that's, going to have some real serious warts. You're going to get punished for it. And Winnipeg has been punished repeatedly. And it just keeps happening over and over again. And it's why, coming into this game, I was really expecting a big Jets response. They've earned a lot of the benefit of the doubt this year. They have proven time and time again that they have been different. This game did not make me feel that way at all. This game felt like so many other playoff collapses before, and it sucks, man. I really do think that this team is capable of better than this, and if they don't make serious adjustments for Game 5, the Jets are in real trouble. I know that they can win that game, but man, does it feel like Winnipeg is spiraling in the wrong direction. So I want to talk about some things that I think the Blues have really keyed up on in just a little bit, because I think it really is also Montgomery just really starting to figure the Jets out. But before we dive into that, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder where the heck all your money went? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, though, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building actual wealth. Monarch Money allows you to not juggle multiple apps. You can use it to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Maybe you want to stop spending so much on streaming services. Monarch Money can help you track those goals and set them so you actually meet those objectives if and when you start cutting your subscriptions. And of course, if you've got a partner or a spouse, they have easy collaboration accounts so that you can always be on the same page and avoid the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're not having the best of days, I'll be honest. A Game 4 loss has my head completely checked out. I had a little bit of an afternoon crash out on social media. Not as bad as I was expecting, to be honest. But listen, I'm pretty upset about how this Jets team has played the last couple of games. It's not Jets hockey, and I know it's not. I've seen this team defend well. I've seen them control games better. They've even beaten this Blues team pretty recently and in pretty impressive fashion. Even in the first two games, we saw them take over the second halves of these games. And yet in the road games, the Jets have just completely looked like a different team. Winnipeg hasn't really been competitive beyond the first period of Game 4, and that to me is just really sad. This Jets team is better than this. Even if they lose a close one, I'm comfortable with that. If you lose a close one where you played really well against an opponent that was really staunchly defending and playing out of their minds, that's fine. I will accept that. That's sort of the nature of hockey. What we're seeing with the Jets, though, has not been that. Winnipeg is struggling with a couple of very specific shot types, and it's not just Hellebuyck. It is from the team top to bottom that's really having an issue with this, and I haven't really seen Arniel address it. I don't know what's going on with their tracking and in-game monitoring, but if they know that the Blues are basically just going to bomb it from the point and really exploit the traffic in front of goal, I haven't seen the Jets adjust to it. I haven't seen the defenders on St. Louis get pressured when they're winding up. I've seen too much space allowed for them to take the shot, and I'm not asking every single player to block shots here. Lord knows we don't need to lose another top-end forward, but somebody is going to have to clear the front of the goal. If Hellebuyck can't see the puck, he is not going to save it. I think that has been made abundantly clear. Like half of the goals in the series from St. Louis are all on screens and deflections. That cannot happen. The Jets have to do something. If Hellebuyck is going to struggle with these shot types, and I think career-wise that's usually been where he's weakest, then somebody is going to have to try and figure out how to keep the Blues away from goal. Montgomery even pointed it out after Game 4. He said it was basically a welcome mat, right? He didn't quite use that language, but he said that they had a much easier time getting to Winnipeg's goal than they have in previous games. And that, for me, is really a searing indictment on the performance of this team. And what I'm really mystified by is why this is happening now. The Jets have controlled the slot defense extremely well this year. That has been, for the past couple of months, one of the strengths and one of the backbones of this team. All of a sudden, it's a huge weakness. The Blues were carving Winnipeg up right in front of goal. And they didn't just do it with, point-blank shots. In fact, I really feel like the way that they've been going about this has been less of the sort of offense where you would expect, the Jets, if they were really giving up the slot, to give up these kind of chances. There have been some odd man breaks and stuff, but I think the bigger story is that when the Blues are creating good shooting opportunities, a lot of it is coming from traffic in front of goal and point shots. It's been a complete, cluster trying to defend this stuff. And Helly, when he's screened from distance, like the Kyle Tucker goal he just got beat completely. He had no idea where the puck was, couldn't see it, and it was a perfectly timed cross in front of goal where I think Morrissey was chasing the Blues screener, so you had a double screen, and Helly never even saw it. That's been the story of so many of these games. Even in the ones where the Jets have won, the Blues have really tried for these distance point shots, and it's put Helly on the back foot. And Winnipeg really didn't have any sort of response in game 4 to any of this. They certainly didn't in game 3. They haven't in game 4. And so I just don't know why this has suddenly become such a big problem. But I will say, I say it's such a big problem now, but it's been a problem before. Colorado has used this. Other teams have done it in playoff series against the Jets. And I'm just sat here wondering, if everyone in the playoffs knows that this is your weakness, how are you going to adjust for it? How are you going to defend? Getting bigger isn't the only solution. The Jets have very clearly shown that they can add size to their defense, and it actually makes things worse. The size doesn't block out the sun and block out Hellebuyck. It only seems to make the puck movement and the time that you spend turning it over in your defensive zone even larger. So at some point, something's going to have to give. And I think the Jets really need to get away from this mindset of bigger is better. What you really want is to find the darn way that gets the puck out of your defensive zone. It doesn't have to be with the world's biggest defender. In fact, I often see with the third D pairing, and it's not just the third D pairing that's been doing this, because even Sandberg, Pionk, and at points Morrissey and DeMello have struggled with this, but especially on the third pairing, they often try to ring it around the boards to make exits, and that's not really working. The Blues have picked off so many of these pass attempts. They've put both, or really all three of Fleury, Schenn, and Miller, or Fleury, Schenn, and Stanley under pressure, and force them to turn things over. And it's just like, at what point does anyone on the coaching staff have a come to whatever deity you believe in moment, right? Does anyone see what we're all seeing? Because I'm watching how the Jets are struggling to exit, and I'm like, surely I can't be the only one that thinks this is a problem and that there is a potential solution in-house to at least make things a little better. Is it going to make the world's biggest difference? I can't tell you that, but I look at how the Jets are struggling to get the puck out, how it's creating so much chaos on these turnovers, how then it leads to a screen point shot, and all of these things keep feeding into this package where it's like death by 1,000 cuts. Stuff that shouldn't be a problem for the Jets has suddenly become the most lethal shot type ever. And it's very frustrating, because I feel like Winnipeg, again, has handled the stuff better before. They've played better hockey before, and yet it feels like we are falling back into the same patterns that got the Jets here to begin with in previous seasons. And so I know I sound really mad. I think I'm just really disappointed and upset. I know that this team is capable of better. I expect them to come out in Game 5 swinging as soon as that puck drops. They have to. There is no other choice, because if you struggle in Game 5 and you maybe eke out a win, or even, heaven forbid, you drop a result at home, they are not going to advance. They just aren't. I feel like they have to show that they can control these games and really come out confidently. This is one of those series where maybe it's a little bit of a wake-up call to Winnipeg that the stuff that they did in the regular season may not matter if you're facing an opponent in a 7-game series. Sure, you had an amazingly dominant regular season. And for the record, I really thought that it was going to translate into strong playoff performances. And for the first couple of games, it did. But now the Blues have adjusted. They're identifying some pre-scout things very specifically with how the Jets defend and how Hellebuyck struggles. And they have keyed in on those moments. So now it is really important for the Jets to adjust and make sure that they don't keep repeating the same mistakes. I know that this team can recover and be better than this. I've seen them do it many times. And it's why I came into this playoffs feeling so much better about this team than the past several Jets teams combined. I felt like this team was going to finally bust the hump that has hurt the squad for many years. I was, ready to get hurt again and believe. And here already we're getting a bit of a gut punch. But if there is one silver lining, it is that it is only a 2-2 series split. This would be so much worse if it was 3-1. But the Jets, they have a little more margin for error. It's not a big one, but it's enough to where it is not game over. They are going to have to figure out some way to create some offense, though, that isn't just the top line or bust. And I know that that's hard. I know that it is a little much to ask of a team that is currently missing 2 of their top 6 forwards, but you are going to have one of those back on Wednesday, most likely. Velarde sounds like he's going to return. And so if that's the case, then you would better find a lineup combination that can get you a win. The Jets need to show that they are the better team here, because so far, for half of this series, they have not been. They have been second best in some really big periods, And I just know that this team is capable of more. They've beaten Dallas before. They've beaten Vegas. They've beaten the Blues. They have gone through some of the toughest teams in the league during the regular season. It is time to translate that to some real playoff success. I thought after the first 2 games in this series, we were finally turning a corner. But here, it's now tied 2-2. What is kind of funny, though, is you'll notice that all the 2-2 series are all in the West. The East has basically been a 2-1, 3-1, one-and-done kind of thing. We're seeing LA currently up 2-0 over Edmonton, but you look at this side of the bracket where the Jets are, and it is brutal, and it was always going to be hard, but I think Winnipeg is going to need to make itself as easier on itself as possible with some of the decisions and choices that they're making. We'll see if they do it later this week, but I want to talk a little bit about the trade deadline and how that's really playing an outsized impact on what's happening in the series. I hoped it wouldn't be a big deal. I thought the Jets had found a way to crack the code and maybe avoid the ramifications of their decisions, but now stuff is starting to catch up. We'll chat about why this is really starting to hurt Winnipeg in just a brief moment. But before we do, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better-for-you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. I'm somebody who actually likes the shelled variety. Cracking them open is maybe a Maryland thing because we're all used to blue crabs down here, but maybe you want the no-shell variety. They're, just a great pack to go, whether you're dropping the kids off at school, you're needing an afternoon pick-me-up at work, whatever it is, they're convenient, they're delicious, they come in some great flavors, and of course, they're a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. And again, it's just a great little pack to grab on the go. You crack it open, you get a protein punch, and you are on your way. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs the protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up with some frustrating thoughts on stuff that is kind of starting to haunt the Jets. So obviously this playoff run has kind of been defined by a tale of 2 halves. And, the good news is it is only a half that's been terrible. The first 2 games were great and went Winnipeg's way. Obviously the latter 2 games, not the case. Where I think I'm starting to really get some concern, though, is the trade deadline that the Jets didn't have. Obviously, you can't predict injuries, but you know how the league is. You know how Gabriel Velarde's health is. You know that Ehlers has missed time. Scheifele at times has gotten hurt in the postseason in a big way. And you can't necessarily replace any of these guys. But the thing is if you have some sort of a longer-term injury, then what you want is to be able to call on some reserves that can help you and bolster your team until they return. Winnipeg has used up about all of its magic that it can. And I think we're starting to see that the Jets, especially when they're beat up like this, are struggling to keep things together, especially when things start to go south really quickly. The Brock Nelson thing is certainly a problem, and I think the Jets, I think what happened, and apparently Darren Dreger said something recently that kind of alluded to this, and I've mentioned that this was probably what happened, but I think Winnipeg really put so many eggs in that basket, and when it didn't work out, and he, either he said no to the Jets, or the Avs were not really getting the offer that they wanted out of Winnipeg, and the Jets basically got leveraged by the Isles into making, the Avs trade happen. I think Winnipeg really put itself in a tough position, and I hear so many times people say, Winnipeg is a place no one wants to be. Chevy has the hardest job, and everyone's got these no trade clauses. But how many of the players that actually got traded had NTCs? Not that many. And I think that's where I struggle to look at this, and I feel like if the Jets said NTCs were the problem, then why didn't they go after guys who didn't have them? If you are going to make a deal for a player, make sure that, you give yourself some flexibility. If the Nelson thing doesn't look like it's going to happen, then you'd better have some alternatives. And it can't just be Brandon Tanev and Luke Shen. I like both guys. I think that they have brought some fun stuff to this team. They are not enough to replace the middle 6 that the Jets are struggling to get offense out of right now. Mason Appleton has really struggled to hit pay dirt. He had a crossbar earlier in this game, But really, you look at the general offensive production out of him the last few months, it's not been sufficient for what the Jets are asking of them. You look at Nemesnikov, who's really struggled to keep pace. He's being asked to be a second-line center when he's really like a fourth-line, grinder on a great Stanley Cup contender. And that's pushing way too much of the burden on his shoulders to try to be this offensive dynamo that he's not. And yet the Jets haven't really been able to, find something either externally or internally to make this better. Now, I do think the Jets have some internal switches that they can make that would improve the situation, but I know that they're not going to do that unless their backs are absolutely against the wall. Winnipeg has shown at times a stubbornness to change, and I think that that's where, if you're going to be stubborn, then make sure that you give yourself a roster with a lineup, lineup creation ability that gives you options. And so far, I think Winnipeg has pigeonholed itself so many times to the point where they don't really give themselves choices. They don't give themselves options. There's no flexibility. It's either, a plan A or maybe some form of a plan B. And if neither of those work, the Jets have no answers. Now, I'm hoping that this is, again, not going to be the case for Game 5. And I want to see what Arniel does with the lineups. But given his history this year and what we've seen, I'm starting to feel not as confident. I really thought coming into the series, things were going to be different. But I feel like, the trade deadline on top of some of the choices that we're seeing with anything from the third D pairing to some of the middle six lineup combinations, I am begging somebody to show a pulse, right? Give me something to work with, because right now what we're seeing has not been enough. I think the responses after Game 3, I just thought that they were going to be bigger and better, but no, it hasn't happened. Outside of the first period of Game 4, the Jets have looked exactly like the team that got its butt whooped in Game 3. And I'm really hoping that this isn't going to be a trend. I know that this team can be more, but this is why I said, a couple of months ago when the trade deadline passed in March, it ended in disaster for the Jets. Luke Schenn, I don't think the team recognizes the fact that he's your number 6 defender and not a guy who should be being used in the roles that he has. I think the team thinks really highly of him, and that's fine. But if it's at the expense of someone like Colin Miller, then you are in real trouble if you don't recognize the lack of puck moving ability and what it does to your back end, especially if you can't even trust the third pairing consistently to even play in third periods. I think that speaks volumes about the decision-making here, and it just feels like, you ever seen that video of the one woman who kept watching the guy put everything through the square hole, even shapes that really shouldn't fit? Yeah, that's what the Jets are doing right now. And I feel like you don't have to make this harder on yourself. You have tools that you can use internally to try and at least give yourself more of a fighting chance. But so far, Winnipeg, I think, hasn't really done that in the past game or two. Miller came in for Game 3, and you know what? He was probably our best skater. His reward, again, was to get benched in Game 4. So what's the point, man? Why do you have him if you're not going to use him? So these are sort of my frustrations pouring out because I've seen them happen too many times. We've been through this before. Last year it was Perfetti. This year it's Miller. Can we just for once find a coaching staff that recognizes where the biggest problems are? And I thought Arniel had really had a better handle on things. And I would think that after the first, really big Game 3 loss where you saw some particular players getting shelled, that it would maybe be a wake-up call. But apparently not. Apparently we've gone relatively back to the same well with a slightly different flavor, and that is the change that we're seeing. So Game 5, Winnipeg, you need to show up. You need to make some big changes. You need to be prepared to clear the crease and give the Blues an actual hard time. They have had way too much run time. The Blues fans are getting cocky. The Jets haven't really proven them wrong yet, and I want to see Hellebuyck put up a huge game. We'll preview Game 5 later this week, but for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for putting up with my ranting tonight. I'm sure some of you feel the same way, but of course, we'll have a preview coverage ahead of Game 5 on Wednesday. Before we close out tonight, though, did want to say thanks again for making Locked On Winnipeg Jets your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out all the new Locked On NHL game night content. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. As always, thanks so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.